For more than 5 decades in broadcast journalism, Diane Sawyer had built a reputation for patience, composure, and persistence. She had interviewed presidents, celebrities, business leaders, and public figures from around the world. No matter how difficult the conversation became, she was known for seeing every interview through to the end. But this encounter unfolded differently from the moment it began. The interview opened with the familiar rituals of professional conversation. Both women exchanged polite greetings before settling into comfortable chairs inside a carefully arranged living room in Los Angeles. The location had been selected to create a calm, personal atmosphere rather than the pressure of a television studio. Soft lighting, minimal distractions, and a relaxed setting were meant to encourage honest discussion. Sawyer started with a question that appeared simple on the surface. "What brings you genuine joy right now?" she asked warmly. "Not your purpose or your career, just simple happiness." Meghan smiled confidently before replying that her children, her family, and building meaningful projects brought her joy. Sawyer gently followed up. "What specifically about your children? Can you tell me about a moment this week that made you laugh? Something Archie said or something Lilibet did?" A brief pause followed. "They're always surprising me," Meghan answered. "How?" Sawyer asked. "Their curiosity, their energy." Sawyer wasn't satisfied. She explained that those were general descriptions rather than actual memories. "I'm asking for a real moment," she continued, "something that happened yesterday or the day before." Meghan responded that she preferred to protect private family moments. Sawyer acknowledged the concern, but noted that carefully selected family stories had been shared publicly before through anniversary videos and birthday posts. Why, she wondered, was recalling a harmless breakfast conversation suddenly off-limits? After another silence, Meghan offered that Archie had made a joke about school. "What was the joke?" Sawyer asked. "I don't remember exactly." The answer immediately caught the veteran journalist's attention. "You said it just happened," Sawyer replied. "You don't remember?" Meghan explained that life as a busy mother caused little details to blur together. Sawyer respectfully disagreed. "I've been a mother," she said. "Moments that genuinely make you laugh don't usually disappear. They tend to stay with you." The conversation then shifted toward Meghan's recent appearance at an international event in Geneva. Sawyer raised questions about criticism surrounding a photograph taken with a political figure who had previously faced allegations of racism and inappropriate behavior. Meghan dismissed the issue as manufactured controversy, explaining that large public events involved hundreds of attendees. Sawyer pressed further. "But you chose to pose for the photograph," she noted. "Did no one on your team review who you were appearing beside?" Meghan answered that it was impossible to research every individual attending such events. Sawyer questioned whether that standard was sufficient for someone whose public image played such a central role in advocacy campaigns. "Your photograph becomes part of your message," she observed. "Doesn't that require careful consideration?" Meghan admitted that mistakes can happen. Sawyer immediately followed with another question. "Was this one a mistake?" Instead of answering directly, Meghan explained that her team chose not to amplify the controversy. Sawyer pointed out the distinction between remaining silent and accepting responsibility. The discussion soon turned to another issue that had generated online debate. Sawyer referenced an Instagram post showing Meghan with her daughter shortly before delivering remarks encouraging parents to limit children's digital exposure. She asked how posting family images publicly aligned with those warnings. Meghan answered that context mattered. Sawyer leaned forward slightly before asking one final question. "What context," she asked calmly, "makes those two messages consistent?" The room grew noticeably quieter as the interview entered its most uncomfortable moment. The conversation became noticeably more intense as Diane Sawyer returned to a topic she believed remained unresolved. She referenced Meghan's recent speech encouraging parents to think carefully before posting images of their children online. "Only hours before that speech," Sawyer observed, "you shared a photo of your own child. What context makes those two actions consistent? Meghan calmly replied that there was a difference between sharing a joyful family moment and exposing a child to harm. Sawyer immediately challenged the distinction. "Who decides where that line is?" she asked. "Your argument has been that many parents don't recognize the risks in what they post. By that logic, how can you be certain you aren't overlooking similar risks yourself?" Meghan answered that she was more aware of online safety than most parents because of her experience advocating on the issue. Sawyer nodded but continued. "If awareness is your expertise," she said, "shouldn't that have made this contradiction even more obvious? If something this visible slipped past you, what else might escape your attention?" The atmosphere shifted. Meghan's expression became noticeably firmer. "I think we should move on," she said. Sawyer disagreed. "I think this is exactly where we should stay," she replied, "because it raises a larger question. Is your advocacy driven by genuine conviction or by public presentation? Someone deeply immersed in an issue usually notices contradictions before anyone else does." Without waiting long, Sawyer steered the discussion toward the Archewell Foundation. "Your organization has existed for several years now," she began. "What would you consider its single greatest accomplishment?" Meghan spoke about meaningful partnerships and collaborative initiatives. Sawyer wanted specifics. "Partnerships leading to what measurable outcome?" she asked. "Has a law changed? A policy been influenced? A community improved in a documented way?" Meghan answered that lasting impact requires patience. "True," Sawyer acknowledged, "but impact also requires tangible action. What action can you point to that produced measurable results?" After taking a sip of water, Meghan said that the foundation had helped raise awareness around important social issues. Sawyer accepted the point but wasn't satisfied. "Awareness is where advocacy begins," she replied. "It isn't where it ends." Drawing on decades of reporting about nonprofit organizations, Sawyer explained that successful charities usually describe concrete achievements: people assisted, legislation influenced, funding delivered, or measurable improvements within communities. "What are Archewell's measurable results?" she asked. Meghan responded that the foundation focused more on creating long-term cultural change than easily quantified statistics. Sawyer questioned that explanation. "If the impact can't be demonstrated," she said, "it's difficult for the public to evaluate its effectiveness. How do people distinguish meaningful change from simply building a brand?" For a moment, Meghan shifted in her chair and partially stood before sitting again. "This interview is becoming hostile," she said. Sawyer remained composed. "I don't believe it's hostile," she answered. "I believe it's specific. Sometimes detailed questions feel uncomfortable because they move beyond broad statements." The discussion then turned toward Prince Harry. "How is Harry doing?" Sawyer asked. "He's wonderful," Meghan replied. "What makes him wonderful today?" Sawyer continued. "What's exciting him? What challenges are the two of you working through together?" Meghan answered that they continued supporting one another's work. Sawyer smiled gently. "That's a description of partnership," she said. "I'm asking about emotion. After 8 years together, what still surprises you about him? What makes you fall in love with him all over again?" Meghan responded that seeing Harry with their children filled her heart. Sawyer carefully redirected the question. "And beyond parenting, what about the relationship between the two of you as husband and wife? What keeps that connection alive?" A long silence followed before Meghan finally replied that she wasn't interested in performing her marriage for public entertainment. "I'm not asking for performance," Sawyer answered quietly. "Only a glimpse of something authentic." She then mentioned ongoing media speculation about the couple spending increasing amounts of time apart and attending more events separately. "What is the reality?" she asked. "We're committed partners," Meghan replied. "Committed to what?" Sawyer asked. "Your family, your work, or each other?" Meghan answered, "All three." Sawyer noticed the order. "You listed family first, work second, and your marriage third. Was that intentional? Meghan insisted Sawyer was overanalyzing her words. I'm simply listening carefully, Sawyer replied. The order people choose often reveals what matters most. The conversation shifted once more, this time toward Meghan's long-estranged father, Thomas Markle. You've spoken publicly about that relationship before, Sawyer said. What would reconciliation require from your side? Not his, but yours. Meghan answered that her father would first need to stop speaking to the media. Sawyer gently redirected the question. That's what you would need from him, she said. I'm asking what inner work you would need to do yourself if reconciliation were ever to become possible. Meghan paused before explaining that years of personal reflection had still left the relationship fractured. Sawyer quietly concluded, then either the healing remains unfinished, or you've accepted that reconciliation may never happen. The atmosphere in the room had grown noticeably heavier. Diane Sawyer remained composed, but her questions became increasingly direct. You've spoken publicly about feeling betrayed, she said carefully. You've discussed it in interviews, documentaries, and other projects. At what point does repeatedly revisiting that pain risk becoming part of the story itself? For a moment, Meghan looked ready to leave. She reached for her purse and shifted forward in her chair. I won't sit here and be accused, she replied. I'm not accusing you of anything, Diane answered evenly. I'm asking questions. How you interpret them is your choice. After a long pause, Meghan slowly sat back down. Let's continue. Diane nodded before moving to another topic. Several members of your communications team and support staff have left over the years. Reports have described unusually high turnover. How do you explain that? Meghan responded that every organization experiences staffing changes, especially when operating under intense public scrutiny. But the pattern appears unusually consistent, Diane replied. Many organizations face pressure without seeing repeated departures. What makes your workplace different? Meghan suggested that working for well-known public figures brings extraordinary challenges. Diane wasn't convinced. There are other members of the royal family who receive even greater public attention, she observed. Yet many of their senior staff remain in place for years. What explains the difference? Meghan answered that she couldn't speak for anyone else's organization. Then speak about your own, Diane said. Why do so many people appear to leave with similar experiences? Meghan dismissed anonymous reports as unreliable. Diane leaned forward. When independent accounts begin describing the same pattern, journalists naturally ask whether they're observing coincidence or consistency. Silence settled over the room. After several seconds, Diane asked a more personal question. During difficult interviews, I often wonder whether someone isn't being open because they can't, or because they simply won't. Which do you think applies here? Meghan looked puzzled. I don't understand. I've asked about your family, your marriage, your charitable work, and your relationships, Diane explained. Each answer has remained broad and carefully managed. I still don't feel I've met the person sitting across from me. I'm trying to be thoughtful. I believe you're being strategic, Diane replied. Every answer seems designed to reveal just enough while protecting everything meaningful. That's unfair. It's an observation. Diane spoke quietly. After decades of interviewing people from every walk of life, you begin to recognize the difference between someone protecting genuine vulnerability and someone carefully presenting the appearance of openness. The words lingered. Finally, Meghan stood. I think we should take a break. Diane rose as well, gathering her notebook. I don't think a break will change anything. Meghan stared at her. What do you mean? I think we're finished. The room fell silent. I'm ending the interview. Not because the questions were difficult, but because we've reached a point where the conversation isn't moving forward. You can't simply end it. I can, Diane answered calmly. This is my production, and my responsibility is to decide whether an interview offers viewers meaningful insight. I answered your questions. You answered them, Diane said. but I don't feel we've moved beyond prepared talking points." Meghan's expression hardened. "People will think this reflects badly on you." "Perhaps," Diane replied. "Or perhaps they'll see a journalist deciding that continuing a conversation without genuine engagement serves neither the audience nor the subject." She gathered her notes without raising her voice. "I've interviewed people during wars, scandals, personal tragedies, and career-defining moments. Difficult conversations don't concern me. Conversations that never move beyond the surface do." With that, Diane quietly walked toward the door, leaving the room in complete silence. The room fell silent after the conversation reached its breaking point. Diane remained standing, her notebook still in her hand, while her guest looked toward the door without saying a word. After a long pause, Diane spoke quietly. "In my career, I've interviewed people who survived unimaginable tragedies," she said. "Parents who lost children, victims of war, public figures whose lives had fallen apart in front of the world. Nearly every one of them, despite their pain, eventually shared something deeply human, a memory, a feeling, or a moment that reminded everyone watching that they were more than their headlines." She hesitated before continuing. "Today, I searched for that moment." The words lingered in the room. "I asked about joy. I asked about family, your work, and the people closest to you. None of those questions required perfection. They only asked for honesty." Her guest folded her arms. "I'm protecting myself." "There is a difference," Diane replied gently. "Protection keeps you safe without shutting everyone else out. Walls, however, eventually keep out understanding, compassion, and even the people who genuinely want to listen." For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Finally, the guest shook her head. "You don't understand what it's like to live under constant scrutiny." "Perhaps not," Diane answered. "But I understand what happens when someone becomes so accustomed to guarding every word that even ordinary conversations begin to feel impossible." The guest turned toward the exit. Before leaving, she looked back. "You've become just another person judging me." Diane calmly shook her head. "I came here hoping to understand you, not to judge you. Those are two very different things." The door closed softly behind her. The room remained quiet. One of the producers stepped forward. "What do we do now?" Diane looked around the empty set before answering. "We don't air it." The producer seemed surprised. "Nothing?" "Nothing." "Why?" "Because broadcasting an interview that never truly became a conversation doesn't help anyone. Sometimes the most responsible decision is knowing when not to tell a story." She gathered her notes and placed them neatly into her folder. "We'll simply say the interview didn't produce what we hoped for. That happens." Months later, while speaking at a journalism conference, Diane reflected on difficult interviews without mentioning any names. "Every interviewer eventually discovers that not every conversation can succeed," she told the audience. "Sometimes the obstacle isn't hostility or disagreement, it's distance. Occasionally, you sit across from someone who has spent so long managing their public image that reaching the person beneath it becomes nearly impossible." She paused. "In those moments, the ethical choice isn't to push harder. It's to recognize the limit." A moderator asked whether one interview stood out above the rest. Diane smiled politely. "I've always believed privacy should survive even unsuccessful conversations." She continued, "My hope is never to expose someone. It's to create enough space for authenticity. Most people eventually step into that space. A few aren't ready, and that's their journey, not mine." For Diane, the experience became a reminder that journalism has limits. Even the most thoughtful questions cannot guarantee meaningful answers. The greatest interviews are never built on perfect responses. They're built on trust, honesty, and the willingness to be seen. Without those elements, even the brightest lights and the most experienced interviewer can only record silence.